We are going to be joined by Robert Graham, who's the chairman of the Arizona Republican Party and an insider in the Trump transition team this week. Welcome to the Mike Broomhead Show.
Well, I got a message, I got a song. Can I get a witness? Tell me what's going on. I show the people I've been away.
You are going to love this interview with Robert Graham. He is an insider with the Trump campaign, part of the transition team. A look from the inside. That happens in just a few moments. But we start every show off with something we call the sweep. It's sponsored by our good friends at Zero Edge Carpet and Tile Cleaning. Let's start off by talking about Donald Trump. Rex Tillerson is the man's name. He is the CEO of ExxonMobil. He is the nominee for Secretary of State. And right away, we started hearing from a couple of different camps. There are those that are very cautious because, of course, as the head of ExxonMobil, he deals with Russia because Russia is nothing but, as John McCain says, a gas station masquerading as a country. They are oil rich in Russia, and they do a lot of dealings there. But they also have always abided by the American sanctions against Russia. Other people say he's a great choice because he's an international businessman. He's a great diplomat. People like Condoleezza Rice, who has been a Secretary of State herself, really likes this choice. So we'll see how Senate hearings go. John McCain in my studio on the radio side said that he wants to give him a fair shot. He wants to hear what he has to say, but he wants to know what he plans to do if he becomes Secretary of State, what he'll do about Russian aggression around the world, especially what's happening in Syria. Donald Trump also met this week with tech leaders from around the country, Apple, with IBM, and with people that are in the industry, leaders in the tech world. And what's great to hear him doing is saying to them, we want to be a partner as a nation. I think getting out of the way with regulation, if you think about this, if you talk to business leaders, would you rather have your taxes lowered or have regulations decreased? It would be a very difficult choice for a lot of leaders because regulation and what they call compliance has become so difficult and so costly for companies. They need to kind of lift the regulatory lid, and I think a lot of that is going to happen with a President Trump. And one of the things that made news, which I couldn't figure out, was Donald Trump scheduled a Thursday press conference to give an update about him divesting himself from businesses and also about some of the choices he was making in his cabinet positions. He postponed that. Well, they're postponing it until after the Electoral College meets, but they're not doing it because of that. They're just postponing it. I don't know what the big deal is. The biggest news story that's kind of gained momentum is they're calling the Russian hack. Here's the difference. I learned this myself. I'm no tech genius. There's a difference between being hacked and being phished with a PH. They were actually phished. John Podesta's email account was phished. He got an email from what looked like Google that said, we need to verify your information. Give us your information for your Google account. They sent it to one of the tech experts in the campaign who was trying to type, this is an illegitimate email. Go to a different website and change your information. Instead, he said it's a legitimate email instead. So somebody clicked on the wrong link, gave the information over. That's where the emails went. Was it the Russians? We don't know if it was the Russians, but I want you to see a piece of video. This is how it's grown. Josh Earnest, who is the White House spokesman, was talking about this issue and makes a ridiculous accusation about Donald Trump. Watch this.
The president-elect didn't call it into question. He called on Russia to hack his opponent. He called on Russia to hack Secretary Clinton.
No, he didn't. Donald Trump was joking when he said, hey, Russia, why don't you find the 30,000 deleted emails? Donald Trump has maintained no one knows who did this. It could have been the Russians, but probably not. That was a bold-faced lie right there from the press secretary for the White House. Locally, let's talk a local issue. And right here in Phoenix, Arizona, we talked with Phoenix Law Enforcement Association last week about the reallocation of 170 officers from the Detective Bureau being reassigned to patrol. So they're going to get patrol beefed up, and you're going to hear from the city of Phoenix, everything is just fine. All these transfers are based on seniority. They're going to happen at the end of February. The problem is, where are the detectives? If you're taking 170 detectives and putting them on the street, who's going to investigate the crimes when people are arrested? Who is going to be able to investigate those crimes? Well, nobody. That's why you cannot rob Peter to pay Paul and have a fully staffed police agency. This is a shell game, nothing more than that. All right, coming up in a few moments, Robert Graham, who is the chairman of the Arizona Republican Party, joins me for a two-segment interview. Robert Graham has really done a lot for Arizona's Republican Party, but he is also a part of the Trump transition team. So what he's been able to do, you'll hear about this transition from the inside in just one moment. We'll be back with that in a moment, but before we close it out, let me talk to you about Zero Res. You know my association with the product. I love it. It's called Empowered Water. I use it in a spray bottle to clean the appliances in my house. It cuts grease like those chemical cleaners, but leaves no residue behind. I don't want that near the food I eat. Well, I don't want it in my carpets either. Zero Res Empowered Water cleans your carpets effectively. They're going to dry faster. They're going to stay cleaner longer. Contact the people at Zero Res, find out about the great specials they have going on right now and the specials for the end of the year. We'll be back with Robert Graham in just a moment. Don't go away. Talking about the transition with Donald Trump and a Republican Party chairman here in the state of Arizona, frequent guest is Robert Graham, and thanks again for coming on.
It's great. Good to be here.
You know, I thought the election season for you was busy.
Oh, yeah. It's been wild.
How about now? I mean,
Well,
post-election.
It's more manic now because you have so many people trying to do so many things, so it's amazing.
Now, you've been a big part of the transition team. You've watched this kind of from the inside, where a lot of us are watching from the outside. I've said jokingly about Twitter, but
Right.
other than that, it's been an A+. I mean, from the moment that President-elect gave the victory speech, which I thought was humble and was gracious, he has handled this transition better than anybody expected, even his detractors. How do you assess what you've seen so far?
I think that's the Donald Trump that everybody was hoping for. When we got on the inside, when you're working on his campaign, you get to know him very well. And you see how he's kind of massaging things. People were criticizing him when he was changing his team and such during the campaign season. But what you saw is a CEO that was manicuring his team. He was building the best chemistry for the best outcome. So the same process is happening now. He's got good people around him. He's got people that weren't always on his team around him. So he has different perspectives. And now as you start to see things come together, you see people intentionally put in positions that he made promises. He's going to get best deal makers. He's going to get people with great experience, people that don't really need the job, they don't need the title, they don't need the future out of it, but they're coming in to give great service. And so it's amazing. It's astonishing, to say the least, to see how he's cultivating this cabinet.
One of the things I've maintained for a long time is, in order for us to get back on track economically, people of means, people that have made a lot of money, are going to need to reinvest their time and their lives into fixing what's broken. And he seems to be building a team of multimillionaires, unapologetically saying, of course I want people that have made a fortune on my team. Are these people going to be able to dedicate the time necessary? They say they're committing, but will they commit?
Yeah, I think it's essential. I mean, a lot of times people become the mouthpiece, and then you have undersecretaries and other staff that are going to really execute. But when you have people that have had this experience, and many of the people that are in his cabinet, if you look at them, they came from self-made. I mean, these people built themselves, so they have an interesting perspective along that whole economic path, kind of the economic food chain of how to get to success. So you have that kind of perspective. You can delegate and you can work people to make sure you have good outcomes. So they're not going to do every single piece of the work, a piece of the job, but they're going to make sure that they have the best people in the right place to have the best outcome. And they already have a track record of doing that. So I think they'll be committed. I think they'll be encouraged to be committed. Some of these people have already announced they're transitioning from their professions to make sure that they give 100% undivided attention to the best outcome for our country.
When people would, the knock or the criticism was, you better be careful because you don't want to criticize or cross. You're going to end up, there's going to be a blowback if you do that. And he's shown to be the exact opposite. I mean, he brings in Nikki Haley, who was very, very critical of him. And he seems to have mended fences with so many people. And when I talked with you about Donald Trump, you're the one who sold me on the fact that he's not the way he's portrayed in the media. I believed you when you said that. What is it about him that you can tell people that sold you on him?
It's behind the curtain, okay? So the very first time I really met him was in New Hampshire during the primary. And we had a good conversation, just talked a little bit about Arizona and such, and I asked him to do a selfie video, or if I could do a video for my daughter Faith, who's a big political giant. She's only 13 years old. And so he did this video, and all he said is, "Hey Faith, I wish you were in New Hampshire." And when I played it back, I looked at this video. He was very gracious and sweet about doing the video, but I watched him, and I had it reeling before he said, "Okay, you ready?" I said, "Yeah," and then I watched him get into character and then do it. And so I see this pro who's been a guy that's been on TV, he's been a character, he understands what sells. And then I saw the soft side for what he did for my daughter, but then I saw that transition. I saw a guy that was very strategic in the way that he portrayed his image and the way that he was talking to America. Then I saw the guy behind the scenes. The way he interacts with my daughter, my daughters, my wife, and my other kids was grandpa-esque. He'd pull them in. My daughter got done with her great speech at that rally, and he gave her a peck on the cheek and said, "Oh my gosh, it was the most amazing thing." But I just watched my daughter melt because she felt loved by this guy. And that may sound strange, but that's who he is, and that's how he engages me. He expects excellence, and he's going to mandate excellence. But at the same time, he's going to say, "Job well done" when it's deserved, and he's going to use his brain to assure that we have best outcome for the people.
What I was most surprised by, and you think you see the image, but you see the rallies. It's not just the image. You do see when he's preaching to the choir how he knows to cater to the crowd and he gets them going. Mm-hmm. But when the victory was won, and after he'd had the conversation with Hillary Clinton, he comes out and gives the most gracious speech. Now, there was a time where his supporters, in that moment, if there was going to be a drain the swamp or lock her up moment, that the crowd would have done that then. But what we saw was he was so gracious, and the crowd followed suit. And it seems to have been that way throughout the entire transition. So I think that's pretty amazing. We needed to break. What I'd like to do is ask you about some of the specific positions that have been filled and transition and tie some of it to Arizona, because one position that hasn't been announced yet is agriculture. Mm-hmm. We talk about the forests and the forest fires and the logging industry. I want to get your impression of some of these positions and what they're going to be like. So Robert Graham is with me. He is on the inside. He's the chairman of the Republican Party in Arizona, business owner himself. We'll be back here in just a moment with him. All right, we're back with Robert Graham, who's the chairman of the Republican Party here in Arizona and have really been a part of the transition. And now we're starting to see this cabinet take shape. Secretary of State choice has been made. Interesting process there. You know, everyone had thought Rudy Giuliani, and then there were other names thrown out there, possibly Mitt Romney. And then all of a sudden we hear about a businessman, a tycoon. Really, ExxonMobil is a major corporation. And you hear some people with fears because of ties and friendships in Russia. But then look at the people behind the scenes that have been an advocate. Condoleezza Rice has been a Secretary of State and a very vocal advocate for him. What do you think of that pick?
I think it's a great pick. You know, one of the things that people get nervous of relationships, but relationships keep us out of war. Relationships increase trade. Relationships, when you have a friendly relationship with anybody, I'm not suggesting that we go to these bad countries that are bad actors and just kind of bow into them. The reality is that's where you start. I mean, corporate deals have to happen in order for a corporation to survive and grow and have good outcomes. Governments never behave like that because they have this endless supply of cash. They're never checked on check and balance. It's really hard to gauge and to manage behavior when the resources aren't pulled away from you. In business, they have to be. So when you have a person that's been around the world, I mean, Exxon and Walmart, I think they trade places as the largest company in the world all the time. That means they have relationships, and those kind of relationships set the stage for great diplomatic relations that lead to good trade and good outcomes.
And the other thing that I don't think people consider is that ExxonMobil does business in Russia, but they've also abided by the U.S. sanctions against Russia. So he understands the downside to the sanctions and what it can do to business, but at the same time, the importance of a political relationship where the sanctions are in place for a reason and still being able to deal within those boundaries. I see that as an asset. I don't know if people are just sometimes being hypercritical just because you have to be critical.
They are, and it's but that kind of intimacy, like you talk about the sanctions, the trade agreements that we have, and having to work through those is going to make it so that he starts in a very good spot and he hits the ground running. If you have younger people come in or people that are maybe qualified but they have a really steep learning curve in order to really be effective in that job, you don't have to worry about that anymore because we're going to get there and we're going to get there quickly. And so I think it's manageable and it's a process driven. I think the left is going to argue about any single person that he brings on, and they're going to try to find fault. But right now, I think it's a wait and see, and you push hard behind this. And right now, what I'm hearing from the Senate, it looks like a lot of these people are just going to burn right through as far as being approved.
In part of the questions I've asked this week, I've talked with our governor, I've talked with both Senators Flake and McCain, and asked the same question because agriculture is yet to be picked.
Right.
And the forests fall under agriculture, not interior. That's going to be a big deal because in Arizona, we know the forest fires we fight, the logging industry that used to flourish in the state. Imagine the jobs and industry in northern Arizona if we can reignite, no pun intended, reignite that logging industry here, manage the forest, not clear cut.
That's right.
How important is this agriculture pick? And because you're from Arizona, has there been any conversation with you that you can tell us about?
Yeah, we've had, yesterday actually had conversations about the Secretary of Agriculture, just conceptually and the impact again on Arizona. If you look at that whole northern corridor that slides down the eastern part of our state, it's massive. If you look at cities like Show Low and you kind of follow right through all the different communities as it relates to it, we used to have thriving communities. You had growth, you had ambition, you had people moving there and doing great things. Now, if you look, we have more drug rehabilitation centers. If you look in strip malls and access stations and all these different things to cater to these people that have really fallen hard in their luck. So it is critically important to a great outcome for Arizona.
Which is interesting because when you talk about the urban communities where the high unemployment rate and then the high drug abuse rate, and people say there are proud people that want to work for a living, right. And it's not an excuse, it's just a reason behind some things. The same would go in communities like a Show Low, Springerville. You go up towards Pace and Snowflake, and you think these were communities that flourished with tradesmen and women that were out in the fields, cutting down trees, making good livings for their families, and the options aren't there for them anymore. Right. Reinstitute those options. We're doing the right thing for the forest because you're clearing away and able to manage the forest. It seems to be a home run. Is this president-elect considering all of that when he appoints the next agriculture?
Yeah, I think I would say absolutely considering with the next the appointment for the agriculture, but also look what he's done with the EPA,
right?
And all these different directors that he's putting in place. All of these regulatory burdens have been unusual as it relates to foresting, mining, a lot of different things that are very intimate to Arizona. So I think you're starting to see the regulatory lift come off. Governor Ducey's ban on new regulations, all of these things are allowing our businesses and our people to breathe a little bit better, and having that coming from the very top with these different agencies as well as the secretaries, that's where we're going to see a real boost in Arizona's economy.
All right, so we have 1 minute left in this segment. Give me your assessment of what, not just what you've seen so far, what are the first 100 days going to be like?
Well, I think it's going to be focused on the executive orders. I think you're going to see people digging in with all the different cabinet positions. There's 6,000 appointees that you're going to hear about. So I don't think you're going to see a huge swing in the legislative agenda, but you're going to see a lot of focus on the executive orders. They have teams that are listed them out, good, bad, and the ugly, and they're starting to see how they impact on infrastructure. So I think you're going to see a lot there. And then after that first 100 days and such, you'll start seeing the legislative swing come to life.
All right, I always appreciate when you come on. I've said for a long time, I love the fact that you're in charge of the Republican Party. There have been really good changes, and not to denigrate anybody else before you, but I love the direction. And I have a feeling that people that may not have known your name in the coming days are going to. So I always thank you for coming on. Happy New Year, Merry Christmas.
Yeah, you too.
We'll be back. Welcome back. It's time for one of my favorite parts of the show. We call it From Arizona for America. It's our way to congratulate and thank the fine Arizona men and women who have recently graduated from boot camp and are now serving in our country's military. So join me in honoring Airman Braden Coleman from Ombudsman Charter West High School in Phoenix, Airman Jose Beltran from Copper Canyon High School in Glendale, and Airman First Class Dominic Castaneda from Kofa High School in Yuma. For a list of more of our friends and neighbors that are from Arizona for America, go to the Mike Broomhead Show page at aztv.com. We'll be back in a minute with Broomhead's Best and hashtag this. Don't go away. Time for my favorite part of the show. We call it Broomhead's Best. All right, the Waste Management Phoenix Open Tee-Off Luncheon. Now, the tournament's got a long name. It's the Waste Management Phoenix Open presented by the Ak-Chin Indian community. But it is a fantastic golf tournament. Every single year it grows. Last year, they broke a record for one-day attendance, over 200,000 people on Saturday. They broke overall attendance records, 600,000 people over the week. The Thunderbirds hosted the lunch. Michael Phelps was the keynote speaker. And Diamondback CEO Derek Hall was the MC, and he is hysterically funny. That's this week's Broomhead's Best. Now it's something we call hashtag this. Michael Floyd, we're going to call this hashtag Flyaway Floyd. Michael Floyd having a down year on the field, released by the Arizona Cardinals, second DUI, falls asleep at the wheel at a stoplight, sits through 2 light changes. They put a patrol car in front and in back before they wake him up, and he was upset that he got arrested. Michael Floyd is now going through waivers and will probably end up with another team. Was going to be a free agent at the end of the year anyway. So that is this week's hashtag This. We'll be back in a moment to close out the show. Don't go away. You know, before we close out the show, next week we are going to be off for the Christmas holiday. So I want to wish everyone out there a Merry Christmas or a Happy Hanukkah, whichever you will be celebrating over the next couple of weeks. And to tell you, it's a privilege to do this show. But as we watch the transition, we talk about the peaceful transition of power in this country. Politics aside, we are a benevolent nation. We're watching people giving to food banks and to different charities right now. And whether you celebrate Christmas or Hanukkah as a religious holiday or if it's just a tradition in your family, the fact of the matter is this time of year is when we take inventory as to how blessed we are. I am blessed to work in an industry that I love with great people here at AZTV and on the radio side at KFYI. And so on behalf from our family here to yours, we wish you a Merry Christmas. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Take care.
Get more of Mike Broomhead on Facebook, Twitter, and of course weekday mornings from 6 to 10 on News Talk 550 KFYI.